Coming up, I'm going to be talking about how Marvel Studios is making a big change to its strategy for Disney Plus moving forward. But before we go any further, make sure you do hit that subscribe button to keep up with the latest Disney Plus news. Hi, it's Roger here from What's On at DisneyPlus.com. It's time for a quick Disney Plus news roundup. So let's start off with talking about how Marvel is going to be making some major changes. We've definitely seen over the last few years since they started making Disney Plus shows that they've gone through some different waves and different ways of looking at things. So obviously when they first launched, they wanted to kind of make movies and kind of turn them into TV series. They wanted them to be on par with the movies. They didn't want it to be like the old days where we had things like Inhumans and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. where they kind of connected to the movies, but they didn't, and you could tell there was a difference, and the TV shows always felt a little bit cheaper. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to make sure the movies were and the series were kind of on par with one another. And you can definitely take a look at some of those early shows, Loki, WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. They were very, very high quality. But there was one major problem that Marvel had in the fact that they were, in some ways, a little bit, what's the word I could use here? A bit cocky with maybe how they were looking at things after the creation of the Endgame and Infinity War, where they were on a high. They were just thinking in some ways that they could just do everything, and they didn't really want to make TV in the same way that how TV has been made for decades. They kind of thought in some ways they knew better and they could do it better. And unfortunately, we have seen that that wasn't really a case. They didn't use the showrunner method, which was kind of a way of having one person running the entire series. They kind of were having different directors coming in and doing different bits and pieces. And it's resulted in a lack of overall quality. We saw Marvel trying to create too many shows, too many movies. They were trying to introduce too many characters. And all of this suffered with some major problems because of, in some ways, just trying to do something that they weren't really ready for. They kind of went in all guns blazes and especially didn't hit the superhero landing. And we saw them wasting a lot of money on shows and doing lots of reshoots and just spending a fortune. And obviously when Bob Iger returned as CEO, the first thing he went and did was like, well, you guys are spending too much money. We need to reduce the amount of content you're creating. Audiences are getting burned out. Audiences aren't going to see the movies. They're not watching the shows. Whether or not that superhero fatigue, but also, just as important, it was the fact that the quality of these shows was lesser than it should have been, and audiences just weren't liking it. Some of them weren't liking the characters as well, some of the people that they were picking. But we've also had another problem where they introduced all these characters in phases 4 and 5, and we've not really seen the continuation of them. Some of them have just turned up for the one series, never to be seen ever again. And looks like Marvel is looking to make some changes, and obviously we've seen a drastic reduction in the amount of stuff that they're releasing. This year we had Echo at the beginning of the year, we're getting Agatha starting up later this month, and then moving next year we're going to have Daredevil and Ironheart, and then the year after I suspect it's going to be Wonder Man and maybe Daredevil, or Wonder Man and Vision Quest, depending on how that one all comes together. But yeah, they are really drastically putting it down. And so recently, during an interview with Entertainment Weekly, the head of streaming at Marvel Studios, Brad Winderbaum, was talking not just about Agatha All Along, which is the main thing he was promoting, but he also went on to say, now we're thinking about television really more like a traditional television, where they could last for multiple seasons, where we can see the characters brew in the culture for hopefully many years. He also explained that moving forward, one thing we're really doing is developing a lot of our shows now simultaneously. So in a way, we're making television more in a traditional style than where we're going to write multiple plots and show bibles before we decide what we want to produce and actually bring it to screen, which gives us more opportunity to experiment and also to plan all sorts of Marvel sandboxes. Now, yeah, this all kind of leans back on the fact that now they've kind of realized that maybe their way of trying to make television and doing it their way wasn't really working, and now they're looking to kind of go more traditional route. Now, I don't think it's a bad idea for having multiple seasons of shows. I think that's a good thing. We don't want just constant runs of limited series. I think there's a place for that. Not every character is going to need multiple seasons, and also not necessarily, the story's not there. And, I do enjoy a nice limited series, one series, bing, bang, boom, gone. But I do think also having multiple seasons is a good thing. Hopefully thinking definitely with like Daredevil, that's probably one that's going to do also much cheaper to make because they're street level. I'm hoping maybe they do something like with the Young Avengers or Champions or whatever they're going to call them. Maybe that could be something. But yeah, I definitely feel like multiple seasons of a show would be better, and also having more characters in there might freshen things up a little bit. say you're just going to have a character pop in, and you could do like, they come in for one episode, do a story and move on. Doesn't always have to be this big, long story arc over multiple, across the whole season. They could just do smaller stories. And I think that's where that Monster of the Week idea, they didn't really want to do that. But in some ways that works with television, and it would allow the characters to have some different stories and just necessarily bringing different people. You can have more things. There's so many options that they could do. And it would also allow maybe for some of these characters to pop up in different stories and just get used a little bit more. Because we're definitely seeing, we've seen so many shows come back, those characters we've not seen again. She-Hulk, Kate Bishop. I mean, not Kate, she turned up for a little bit. But again, they're teasing what's moving forward. We're not really getting anywhere. And with now there being less shows, hopefully, like with multiple seasons, they can do something a little bit more interesting with it. But I definitely think there's a place now for Marvel to have just, one or two shows, multiple seasons. And again, you can bring in different characters and, cameos and storylines and stuff. And I think it would just be more interesting. And I think also they can get more people involved in it and not feel like, if you miss it, you just, that whole situation where, people will just skip a TV series because they don't like the character. Maybe if it's been around a little bit longer and they've got different characters popping in. And I think that's where, like, maybe a team up, if you did like West Coast Avengers. I don't know if they're going to use the Avengers terminology because they might want to keep that one just for the movies. But if you have a team, something like that, then you can rotate the team members a little bit and you can kind of freshen things up. A little bit like we saw with like the DC shows with like the Flash and Arrow, where you could kind of have different characters popping in and out. Maybe that might be a way moving forward, rather than it always feeling like lesser characters and stuff. It's a very weird little system, but I am hopeful really that moving forward that Marvel is in a better position to sort out its television system. It can go alongside movies and it can be interconnecting and all the rest of it. I mean, I'd love to see like Miss Marvel coming back and being on TV and having, I don't necessarily think, if she has her own TV series, but if she was in a long running show with multiple characters, that might work again, like I said, like with maybe like Champions, Young Avengers, something on those lines where you can put a few of these characters together and have them having adventures. And you don't always have to have all of them. You could have two of them doing a mission, or just a bit like with the cartoon, really, where they don't always have all the characters, but they can move them around a little bit. You're not necessarily going to see them all coming in from the big movies, but it might be easier to kind of say, look, Florence Pugh, we just could do with you for maybe like, one episode. It might be easier to get them in, that kind of thing. Now, I don't think we're going to see like Iron Man or anything like that popping up in these shows, but multiple seasons, I think that's a good thing. There's a lot of people now that are really annoyed with streaming, with there just being just not enough seasons of these shows. Everything's getting cancelled after 2 or 3. And yeah, Marvel's kind of got in that situation. We've got all these like one-shot kind of series kind of things. Maybe like Midnight Suns is another good example, where we could bring in Werewolf by Night, Moon Knight, Blade, Swamp Thing. Bring these characters in together. Or was it Man Thing or Swamp Thing? I'm getting confused with the DC one there. But nevertheless, you know what I mean. I think this is definitely a good step forward. But I'd love to know, do you think them kind of going into multi-season shows is a good thing for Marvel? Especially if we're going to be getting less shows. Like I said, like maybe a Defenders series could be a good way of moving forward. That kind of thing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. Go check us out over at what's on at disneyplus.com. Like, follow, and subscribe. And I'll actually see you guys soon. Laters.